I still remember the exact moment my life spiraled completely out of control. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September when I heard that knock on my door. The kind of knock that somehow manages to sound demanding, even though it's just knuckles on wood. I was living in my cozy two-bedroom house in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, minding my own business when everything changed. My name is Emma, and at 32 years old, I thought I had finally found my peace after years of family drama and personal struggles. How wrong I was. When I opened that door, there stood my Aunt Patricia, all 53 years of her, with 3 overstuffed duffel bags at her feet and that familiar look of entitlement plastered across her face. She didn't wait for an invitation or even a hello. She simply announced that she would be staying with me for a while, as if it were already decided, as if my opinion didn't matter at all. The audacity of it still makes my blood boil when I think about it now. You have to understand something about Aunt Patricia. She wasn't just any relative who had fallen on hard times. This was a woman who had burned every bridge she'd ever crossed, who had a rap sheet longer than my grocery list, and who had most recently been evicted from her apartment for attempting to break into her landlord's storage unit to steal what she claimed were her belongings, but were actually vintage electronics he was storing. The landlord, Mr. Chen, had called me just 2 weeks prior to warn me that she might come knocking, and here she was, right on schedule. I tried to stand my ground that day. I really did. I planted my feet firmly in the doorway and told her in no uncertain terms that she couldn't stay. My house was my sanctuary, the first place I'd ever truly owned, bought with my own hard-earned money from years of working as a dental hygienist. Every wall, every piece of furniture, every small decoration represented my independence and my escape from the chaos that had defined my childhood. But Patricia had other plans. When I refused her entry, she didn't argue or plead like a normal person might. Instead, she used her considerable bulk to physically shove me aside, nearly knocking me into my own coat rack. The force of it shocked me so much that I stumbled backward, catching myself on the wall. She marched past me like she owned the place, dragging her bags behind her, leaving scuff marks on my hardwood floors that I had just had refinished. I grabbed her arm, trying one more time to assert myself, to reclaim my space, but the look she gave me stopped me cold. It was a look I recognized from my childhood, the same look she'd given my mother before their infamous Thanksgiving brawl of 2008. The same look she'd apparently given her ex-boyfriend Marcus before she'd attacked him with a frying pan while he slept. That incident had landed her in county jail for 6 months, and the story had become family legend, whispered about at gatherings when she wasn't around. The thing about Patricia was that she had this way of making you feel like you were the unreasonable one. As I stood there, my hand still on her arm, she calmly informed me that if I didn't let go and let her stay, she would make sure everyone in the family knew exactly what kind of person I was. She didn't specify what she meant by that, but the threat hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. Family was complicated for me, and she knew it. She knew exactly which buttons to push. My relationship with my grandparents, Harold and Marie, was already strained. They had raised me after my mother passed away when I was 14, and while I was grateful for that, they had always made it clear that family came first, no matter what. They had enabled Patricia's behavior for decades, always bailing her out, always making excuses, always expecting the rest of us to do the same. The thought of them turning against me, of losing the only parental figures I had left, was terrifying, so I let go. I stepped back and watched as Patricia made herself at home in my guest room, the room I had carefully decorated with soft blues and whites, with the quilt my mother had made before she died displayed on the bed. Patricia tossed that quilt aside like it was nothing, dumping her bags on top of it. I stood in the doorway, feeling like a stranger in my own home, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The first few days were a nightmare dressed up as mere inconvenience. Patricia acted like she was doing me a favor by gracing me with her presence. She complained about everything. The water pressure in the shower wasn't strong enough. The coffee maker was too complicated. The neighbors were too noisy, even though the Johnsons next door were the quietest elderly couple you could imagine. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets because she didn't like my organizational system, moved my living room furniture because the feng shui was apparently all wrong, and threw out several of my houseplants because she claimed they were attracting bugs, which they weren't. But it wasn't until the third day that things took a truly dark turn. I had just gotten home from a particularly long day at work. Dr. Morrison had scheduled back-to-back root canals, and my feet were killing me. All I wanted was to kick off my shoes, pour myself a glass of wine, and watch some mindless television. Instead, I found my wallet on the kitchen counter, conspicuously open and significantly lighter than when I'd left it that morning. $250. That's what was missing. I had just gone to the ATM the day before because I was planning to go to the farmer's market that weekend. I always like to pay the local vendors in cash. But now that money was gone, and there was only one person who could have taken it. I found Patricia lounging on my couch, drinking directly from a bottle of wine I'd been saving for my birthday, watching some reality show at a volume that could wake the dead. When I confronted her about the money, she didn't even have the decency to deny it. She just shrugged and said she needed to buy some essentials, as if my money was automatically her money just because we shared some DNA. When I demanded she pay me back, she laughed, actually laughed, and told me to consider it rent for all the years she'd helped take care of me as a kid. The revisionist history was astounding. Patricia had barely been around during my childhood, too busy with her own drama to pay attention to her orphaned niece. I told her she had to leave. I used my sternest voice, the one I used with particularly difficult patients at work. But Patricia just smirked and informed me that she had rights. Squatters' rights, she called them, though she'd only been there 3 days. She said I'd have to formally evict her if I wanted her gone, and we both knew that process could take months. The smugness in her voice made me want to scream. That's when I made my first call to my grandparents. I was sure that once they heard what she'd done, they'd take my side. Harold answered the phone with his usual gruff hello, and I poured out the whole story. The forced entry, the theft, the disrespect. I could hear Marie in the background asking what was wrong, and Harold relaying my words to her. When I finished, there was a long pause, and then Harold cleared his throat. His response shattered me. He said that Patricia was family, and family helped family, no matter what. He reminded me of all the times they'd helped me, all the sacrifices they'd made, and suggested that maybe it was time I returned the favor. When I tried to explain that Patricia had literally stolen from me, Marie got on the phone and said that Patricia was going through a tough time and I should show some compassion. They made me feel like I was the selfish one, like I was failing some crucial test of family loyalty. After I hung up, I sat on my bedroom floor and cried. Not just a few tears, but full body-shaking sobs. I felt so alone, so betrayed by the people who were supposed to support me. Meanwhile, I could hear Patricia in the living room, talking loudly on her phone, probably spinning her own version of events to whoever would listen. The wine bottle clinked against the coffee table, and I knew she'd probably finished the whole thing. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of frustration and growing anger. Patricia's behavior escalated from bad to worse. She didn't just drink my wine. She drank everything. I'd come home to find empty bottles of alcohol I didn't even remember buying, including a bottle of champagne I'd been saving since my promotion 2 years ago. She'd somehow found it in the back of my hall closet, behind my winter coats. Nothing was sacred. Nothing was off limits. My morning routine was completely disrupted. I'd wake up to find Patricia passed out on the couch, the television still blaring, empty food containers scattered around her like she'd had a one-person party. The smell was overwhelming. Stale alcohol mixed with whatever fast food she'd ordered with my money. Because yes, she'd also memorized my credit card number from the one time I'd used it to order pizza for us. I started hiding my wallet, but she always seemed to find ways to access my funds. The house that had once been my pride and joy became a prison. I started staying late at work just to avoid going home. Dr. Morrison noticed and asked if everything was okay, but how could I explain that my aunt had essentially held me hostage in my own home? It sounded too absurd to be true. My coworkers started commenting that I looked tired, and I was. I wasn't sleeping well, partly because Patricia would often have loud phone conversations at 2 a.m, and partly because I was constantly anxious about what new disaster I'd wake up to. Then came the complaints. Oh, the endless complaints. Patricia had opinions about everything, and none of them were positive. The towels I provided weren't soft enough. She needed Egyptian cotton, apparently. The sheets had too low a thread count. The shower curtain was the wrong color and clashed with her aura. The refrigerator hummed too loudly. The neighbor's dog barked too much, even though I'd never heard Sweet Little Muffin make a sound. She complained about the temperature, the lighting, the way the house faced, the color of the walls, the type of flooring, even the doorknobs. Nothing was good enough for Princess Patricia, but the complaints were just the background noise to her more destructive behaviors. She started inviting people over without asking. The first time it happened, I came home to find two women I'd never seen before sitting in my living room, their feet up on my coffee table, ash from their cigarettes dropping onto my carpet despite my strict no-smoking rule. Patricia introduced them as her friends, Deb and Crystal, as if that explained everything. They were both clearly intoxicated, and the empty bottles on the table suggested they'd been at it for a while. When I asked them to leave, Patricia gave me that look again, the dangerous one. She told me I was being rude to her guests and that I needed to learn how to be more hospitable. Then, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she suggested I make myself useful and go buy them some more gin. The audacity of it took my breath away. These strangers were in my home, drinking my alcohol, making a mess of my things, and I was expected to facilitate it. I retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I could hear them laughing, probably at my expense. The sound of glass breaking made me flinch. Something had been knocked over and shattered. I didn't even want to know what it was. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and tried to lose myself in a podcast, but I couldn't focus. All I could think about was how my life had been turned upside down in less than a week. My safe space had been invaded, my peace destroyed. I started having dreams about coming home to find the house empty, Patricia gone, everything back to normal. But every morning, I'd wake up to the reality of her presence. The shower would be running for an absurdly long time, using up all the hot water. My expensive shampoo would be nearly empty after just a few days. My food would be gone, replaced by Patricia's preferred diet of junk food and frozen dinners that she expected me to pay for. The financial strain was becoming unbearable. Between the stolen cash, the unauthorized credit card charges, and the increased utility bills from Patricia's wasteful habits, I was struggling to make ends meet. I had always been careful with money, saving diligently for emergencies and retirement, but Patricia was draining my accounts faster than I could replenish them. When I tried to cancel my credit cards, she somehow convinced the credit card company that she was me and got them to send new ones to the house, which she promptly intercepted. I started documenting everything, taking photos of the messes she left, keeping receipts of all the things she'd taken or destroyed. I thought maybe if I had enough evidence, my grandparents would finally see the truth. But I was also terrified of the confrontation that would come when I tried to use it. Patricia had a way of twisting things, of making herself the victim in any situation. She'd done it her whole life, and she was very, very good at it. The breaking point came exactly 2 weeks after she'd forced her way into my life. It was a Saturday morning, and I woke up feeling oddly optimistic. Maybe it was because the sun was shining for the first time in days, or maybe I was just desperate for something good to happen. I decided to wear my mother's necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small pearl pendant that was my most treasured possession. My mother had given it to me just weeks before she died, making me promise to take care of it. For 18 years, I had kept that promise. The necklace was always kept in a specific spot in my jewelry box, wrapped in a soft cloth to prevent tarnishing. But that morning, when I opened the box, the cloth was there, but the necklace was gone. My heart stopped. I removed everything from the jewelry box, checking every compartment twice, 3 times. I searched my entire dresser, looked under the bed, checked the bathroom in case I'd somehow left it there. But deep down, I knew exactly where it was, or rather, where it had gone. I stormed into Patricia's room without knocking. The smell hit me first. Stale alcohol and something else. Something sour. She was sprawled across the bed, still in yesterday's clothes, snoring loudly. Empty bottles cluttered the nightstand, and clothes were strewn everywhere. My guest room, my beautiful, peaceful guest room, looked like a tornado had hit it. But I didn't care about any of that. All I cared about was my mother's necklace. I shook her awake, none too gently. She groaned and tried to roll away from me, but I wasn't having it. I demanded to know where my necklace was, my voice shaking with a combination of rage and desperation. At first, she pretended not to know what I was talking about, rubbing her eyes and yawning dramatically. But when I described it and told her it was missing from my jewelry box, she had the nerve to smile. She said she'd borrowed it. Borrowed? As if you could borrow someone's most precious possession without asking, as if it were a cup of sugar or a phone charger. When I demanded she return it immediately, she waved her hand dismissively and said she'd give it back later, that I was being dramatic. But I knew Patricia. I knew what borrowed meant in her vocabulary. It meant she'd already sold it to the first pawn shop or dealer who'd give her cash for her next bottle. That's when something inside me snapped. 18 years of grief, 2 weeks of abuse, and a lifetime of being walked over by this family crystallized into a single moment of clarity. I told her to get out. Not later, not tomorrow, but right now. I said it calmly, clearly with a finality that surprised even me. But Patricia just laughed. She actually laughed at my pain, at my loss, at my completely reasonable demand that she leave my house after stealing the last connection I had to my dead mother. She sat up slowly, stretching like a cat, completely unbothered by my distress. Then she launched into a tirade about how selfish I was, how I had always been the spoiled one, the favorite, how I had gotten everything while she had gotten nothing. She said that as my mother's sister, she had just as much right to that necklace as I did. She said my mother would be ashamed of how I was treating her, that family was supposed to share everything. The irony of her invoking my mother's memory while sitting in the wreckage of her latest betrayal was not lost on me. My mother had been nothing like Patricia. She had been kind, responsible, generous to a fault. She would have given anyone the shirt off her back, but she also would never have tolerated Patricia's behavior. In fact, in the months before her death, she had specifically warned me about Patricia, told me to be careful, to not let her take advantage of my good nature. I pulled out my phone and called my grandparents again. This time, I didn't hold back. I told them everything: the drinking, the theft, the destruction of property, and now the stolen necklace. I told them I was going to call the police if they didn't help me get Patricia out of my house. There was silence on the other end for a long moment, and I thought maybe, finally, I had gotten through to them. But then Marie spoke, her voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. She said they were disappointed in me, that they had raised me better than this. She said Patricia was going through a hard time because her sister, my mother, had died and left her with nothing while I had inherited everything. She said I was being cruel and selfish, and that if I called the police on Patricia, they would never speak to me again. The ultimatum hung between us like a blade. I hung up without saying goodbye. Patricia was watching me with that satisfied smirk, knowing she had won again. She stood up, steady despite the hangover she must have had, and suddenly the room seemed too small for both of us. What happened next was like something out of a nightmare. Patricia's smirk morphed into something darker, and she began to pace the room like a caged animal. She started screaming about all the ways I had wronged her over the years. According to her revised history, she had been my primary caregiver after my mother died, had sacrificed everything for me, had put her life on hold to make sure I was okay. The lies were so outrageous that I might have laughed if I wasn't so furious. She had barely been present during those dark months after my mother's death. It was my grandparents who had taken me in, who had held me while I cried myself to sleep, who had made sure I finished school and went to college. As she ranted, Patricia began destroying things. She swept everything off the dresser with one violent motion. A ceramic lamp my best friend had given me as a housewarming gift shattered against the wall. Picture frames went flying, glass exploding across the floor. She overturned the nightstand, kicked the chair, and punched a hole in the wall. The destruction was methodical in its chaos, designed to hurt me as much as possible. I backed out of the room, genuinely frightened for the first time. This wasn't just an entitled relative anymore. This was someone having a complete breakdown, and I was trapped in the house with her. The sound of breaking glass and splintering wood filled the air. I could hear her still screaming, calling me every name in the book, accusing me of ruining her life, of stealing her birthright, of turning the family against her. The neighbors must have heard the commotion because within minutes there was a knock at the door. I ran to answer it, relief flooding through me at the sight of 2 police officers. Mrs. Johnson from next door was standing behind them, her face creased with worry. She had called them when she heard the screaming and breaking glass. I had never been so grateful for nosy neighbors in my entire life. I quickly explained the situation, or tried to. How do you summarize 2 weeks of hell in a few sentences? I told them my aunt had moved in without permission, had been stealing from me, and was now destroying my property. Even as I spoke, we could hear Patricia still raging in the guest room, the sound of destruction continuing. The officers exchanged glances and asked me to show them where she was. But the moment we reached the guest room and Patricia saw the police, her entire demeanor changed. It was like watching a master actress slip into character. The rage evaporated, replaced by tears. She collapsed onto the bed, sobbing dramatically, suddenly transformed from aggressor to victim. She told the officers that I was trying to throw her out onto the streets, that she was a grieving woman who had lost her sister and just needed somewhere to stay while she got back on her feet. She painted a picture of me as a heartless niece who had inherited everything while she got nothing, who was now begrudging her even a temporary place to stay. She mentioned my mother's death, how close they had been as sisters, how I was dishonoring my mother's memory by treating her this way. The tears flowed freely, and her voice broke at just the right moments. It was a masterful performance, and I watched in horror as the officer's expressions softened. When I tried to interject, to point out the destruction she'd caused, the stolen money, the necklace, Patricia just cried harder. She said I was making things up because I didn't want to help family. She claimed the room had been like this when she arrived, that I was a slob who was trying to blame her for my own messiness. She even suggested that I had broken things myself to frame her, that I had mental health issues I was projecting onto her. The officers looked between us, clearly unsure who to believe. One of them, Officer Martinez, according to his badge, asked me if Patricia had been staying here. When I admitted she had been here for 2 weeks, his expression grew more complicated. He explained that because she had been living here with my initial permission, I tried to argue that there had been no permission, but he pointed out that I had let her in. She was now considered a tenant under state law. They couldn't remove her without a formal eviction process. The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman had forced her way into my home, stolen from me, destroyed my property, and now the law was protecting her? Officer Martinez must have seen my distress because he added quietly that I should start the eviction process immediately and document any further incidents. But for now, their hands were tied. Patricia's tears miraculously dried up the moment the officers left. She gave me that satisfied smirk again, knowing she had won this round. She actually had the audacity to wave at them from the window as they drove away. Then she turned to me and said that if I tried that again, things would get much worse for me. The threat was clear, and I believed her. This woman who had already taken so much from me was capable of anything. The next few days were a special kind of torture. Patricia seemed emboldened by her victory with the police. She got louder, more demanding, more destructive. She'd leave the stove on after cooking, creating fire hazards. She'd clog the toilet and leave it for me to deal with. She'd blast music at 3 a.m, and when I asked her to turn it down, she'd turn it up louder. It was psychological warfare, designed to break me down, and it was working. I went to see a lawyer, using what little money I had left to pay for a consultation. Mr. Frederick, a kind older man who reminded me of what I wished my grandfather could be, listened to my story with growing concern. He helped me file the eviction paperwork, but warned me it could take 30 to 60 days, possibly longer if Patricia contested it, which she almost certainly would. He also suggested I install cameras in the common areas of my house to document her behavior, which I did immediately. The cameras captured everything. Patricia passed out drunk on the couch at noon. Patricia going through my mail. Patricia pocketing money from my purse when she thought I wasn't looking. Patricia bringing home random men at all hours, men who looked as rough as she did. Patricia throwing my books into the garbage because she needed shelf space for her empty bottles. Every day brought new evidence of her awfulness, but also new damage to my home and my sanity. My work began to suffer. I was exhausted, anxious, and distracted. I made mistakes I'd never made before, mixing up appointments, dropping instruments. Dr. Morrison pulled me aside and gently suggested I take some time off to deal with whatever was going on in my personal life. But I couldn't afford to take time off, not with Patricia draining my finances. I needed every penny of my salary just to keep up with the destruction she was causing. Then came the night that changed everything. I woke up to the acrid smell of smoke filling my bedroom. My fire alarm was shrieking, and I could see an orange glow under my door. I grabbed my phone and the emergency bag I'd started keeping by my bed, a sad testament to how unsafe I felt in my own home, and carefully opened my door. The hallway was full of smoke, and I could see flames coming from the kitchen. I ran through the smoke, coughing and choking, and found Patricia in the kitchen, swaying drunkenly as flames engulfed the stove. She had apparently decided to cook something in her intoxicated state and had passed out standing up. Grease had caught fire and spread to the kitchen curtains. The room was quickly becoming an inferno, and Patricia was just standing there, oblivious to the danger. Every instinct told me to run, to save myself and let her deal with the consequences of her actions. But despite everything she had done to me, I couldn't leave her there to die. I grabbed her arm and dragged her toward the door, both of us coughing from the smoke. She was dead weight, barely conscious, mumbling incoherently about being hungry. I managed to get us both outside just as the flames began to spread to the cabinets. Mrs. Johnson was already outside with her phone, having called 911. Other neighbors were emerging from their houses, watching in horror as smoke poured from my kitchen window. The fire department arrived within minutes, but those minutes felt like hours. I sat on my front lawn, still in my pajamas, watching firefighters rush into my home with hoses, and felt something inside me break. Patricia, meanwhile, had collapsed on the grass and was now snoring, completely unaware that she had nearly killed us both. The firefighters managed to contain the fire to the kitchen, but the damage was extensive. My beautiful kitchen, where I had spent so many happy hours cooking and baking, where I had hosted dinner parties for friends, where I had learned my grandmother's secret recipe for apple pie, was destroyed. The fire chief approached me as they were wrapping up. He looked at Patricia, still passed out on the lawn, then at me with a mixture of pity and understanding. He said it was clear what had happened: the grease fire, the alcohol, the general state of negligence. He asked if I wanted to press charges, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said. Yes, I absolutely wanted to press charges. The police arrived to take Patricia away. This time, there were no tears, no performance. She was too drunk to put on her usual show. They had to practically carry her to the police car, and even then she was mumbling threats about suing me, about taking my house, about making me pay. But her words had lost their power over me. I was done being afraid, done being manipulated, done putting family loyalty above my own safety and well-being. Of course, my phone started ringing almost immediately. My grandparents had somehow already heard, probably from Patricia's one phone call from jail, and they were furious. But not at Patricia for nearly burning down my house. No, they were furious at me for having her arrested. Harold's voice was shaking with rage as he accused me of turning my back on family, of being heartless and cruel. Marie took the phone and said I was no granddaughter of hers if I didn't drop the charges immediately. Something beautiful happened in that moment. As I stood there in my smoke-damaged house, looking at my destroyed kitchen, wearing pajamas that reeked of smoke, listening to my grandparents defend the woman who had terrorized me and nearly killed me, I felt free. Their words, which would have devastated me just weeks before, now seemed almost comical in their absurdity. I realized I had been held hostage by their opinions my entire adult life, letting their twisted version of family loyalty dictate my choices. I told them, very calmly, that Patricia had committed arson and endangered both our lives. I told them that she had stolen from me, destroyed my property, and made my life a living hell. I said that if they wanted to enable her destructive behavior, that was their choice. But I was done sacrificing my safety and sanity for someone who had never shown me an ounce of genuine care or respect. And then I said something I should have said years ago. I told them that their enabling was the reason Patricia had never faced consequences for her actions, and that they were just as responsible for this situation as she was. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then Harold said that if I proceeded with pressing charges, I could consider myself cut out of their will and out of their lives. The threat that would have terrified me 2 weeks ago now just made me tired. I told him that was fine, that I'd rather have my safety and self-respect than their money or their toxic version of love. Then I hung up and blocked their numbers, The next few days were a whirlwind of insurance claims, contractor estimates, and legal procedures. Patricia was charged with arson, endangerment, destruction of property, and theft. Her bail was set high enough that my grandparents couldn't easily afford it, though I heard through the family grapevine that they were trying to take out a second mortgage on their house to free her. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were willing to risk their own home for someone who had destroyed mine. The investigation into the fire revealed more than just Patricia's drunken negligence. The firefighters found evidence that she had disabled 2 of my smoke detectors, presumably because they kept going off when she smoked in the house. If I hadn't woken up when I did, if the one working detector hadn't been in my bedroom, we both could have died. This additional evidence upgraded some of her charges, making her situation even more serious. My insurance covered most of the repairs, though my rates went up significantly. I had to live in a hotel for 3 weeks while the kitchen was rebuilt, and the smoke damage throughout the house was addressed. It was actually peaceful, staying in that small hotel room. No one could force their way in. No one could steal from me while I slept. No one could destroy my things or threaten my safety. It was the best sleep I'd had in weeks. During this time, I also filed a restraining order against Patricia. My lawyer, Mr. Frederick, had suggested it immediately after the fire, and the evidence from my security cameras made it an easy sell to the judge. Patricia was ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my home, and my workplace. It felt like building a legal fortress around my life, and I needed those walls. The eviction process, which had seemed so daunting before, became moot after the arrest. Patricia's belongings were considered evidence and were removed by the police. Going through them with the officers was illuminating and heartbreaking. Hidden among her clothes and empty bottles were more of my possessions. Jewelry I hadn't even realized was missing, gift cards from my desk drawer, even some of my mother's old photos that I kept in albums Patricia must have gone through. But my mother's necklace was nowhere to be found. The detective assigned to the case, Detective Washington, was a godsend. She took my case seriously from the start, never minimizing what I'd been through or suggesting I should have handled family matters privately. She told me that family members actually commit a significant percentage of thefts and property crimes, but people rarely report them out of misplaced loyalty or shame. She praised me for standing up for myself and assured me that I was doing the right thing. Patricia's trial was set for 3 months later. In the meantime, I focused on rebuilding, not just my kitchen, but my life. I changed all my locks, installed a better security system, and started therapy to deal with the trauma of the past few weeks. My therapist, Dr. Chen, helped me understand that I had been conditioned from childhood to accept toxic behavior from family members, to prioritize their needs over my own safety and well-being. It was painful work, unpacking years of dysfunction, but it was necessary. Word of what had happened spread through the family like wildfire. Some relatives reached out to express support, sharing their own stories of Patricia's behavior over the years. Apparently, I wasn't her first victim, just the first one to involve the police. Others, particularly those close to my grandparents, sent nasty messages accusing me of breaking up the family. I blocked them all. I was building a new family of choice, surrounding myself with people who actually cared about my well-being. My coworkers rallied around me in ways I never expected. When they found out what had happened, they organized meal trains so I wouldn't have to worry about cooking while dealing with repairs. Dr. Morrison gave me a raise, saying I'd been underpaid for years and he wanted to help me get back on my feet. Even some of my neighbors, who I'd barely spoken to before, began checking in on me regularly. Mrs. Johnson brought me cookies and told me she was proud of me for standing up to Patricia. 3 months felt both endless and brief. I threw myself into work and home repairs, trying not to think about the upcoming trial. But as the date approached, the anxiety crept back in. What if Patricia convinced the jury she was the victim? What if my grandparents testified on her behalf? What if the charges didn't stick and she came back to torment me again? The what-ifs kept me up at night, but I needn't have worried. Patricia, in her infinite wisdom, had continued her crime spree while out on bail. She had been caught shoplifting, violated the restraining order by showing up at my workplace, and failed multiple drug and alcohol tests required by her bail conditions. By the time the trial came around, she had dug her own grave so deep that my testimony was almost unnecessary. Still, I testified. I sat in that courtroom and told the truth about everything she had done. I showed the security camera footage, presented the evidence of theft, described the terror of waking up to a burning house. Patricia tried to intimidate me with glares from the defendant's table, but I kept my eyes on the prosecutor and told my story. When I finished, I felt like I had exorcised a demon that had been haunting me my entire life. My grandparents did show up to support Patricia, sitting in the gallery looking older and more frail than I remembered. They wouldn't make eye contact with me, but I could feel their disapproval radiating across the courtroom. When Patricia was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison with mandatory rehabilitation programs, they left without a word. It was the last time I saw them. After the trial, I discovered what had happened to my mother's necklace. Detective Washington had tracked it to a pawn shop 2 towns over. Patricia had sold it for $30 the day after she took it. $30. She had traded my most precious possession, my last tangible connection to my mother, for what probably amounted to 2 bottles of cheap vodka. The pawn shop had already sold it to someone else, and despite Detective Washington's best efforts, we couldn't track down the buyer. The loss of the necklace hit me harder than almost everything else. I spent days crying over it, mourning not just the necklace, but what it represented. The mother I'd lost too young, the family that had failed me, the innocence I'd had before Patricia crashed into my life. But eventually, I realized something important. My mother's love wasn't contained in that necklace. It lived in my memories, in the person she'd raised me to be, in my refusal to let Patricia destroy me the way she'd destroyed so many other things. I used the restitution money from the trial to make my home even better than before. I painted the walls in bright, cheerful colors that Patricia would have hated. I bought new furniture to replace what she'd damaged, choosing pieces that made me happy rather than worrying what anyone else would think. I turned the guest room, the site of so much destruction, into a home office and crafting space, filling it with creativity and joy instead of painful memories. 6 months after Patricia's sentencing, I got a letter from my grandmother. Not a phone call, not a visit, but a formal letter on their ancient stationery. In it, Marie expressed regret, not for enabling Patricia or for choosing her over me, but for the fact that I had forced them to choose sides. She said that when Patricia got out of prison, they hoped we could all reconcile and be a family again. The delusion was breathtaking. I threw the letter away without responding. A year passed, then 2. I heard through distant relatives that Patricia had been released early for good behavior, but had quickly violated parole by stealing from a grocery store. She was back in prison within 3 months. My grandparents' health deteriorated, and they ended up in assisted living. Their house sold to pay for Patricia's various legal fees over the years. The family empire built on enabling and toxicity had crumbled, and I felt nothing but relief. I wish I could say that I found my mother's necklace again, that there was some miraculous reunion with that precious piece of jewelry. But real life doesn't always provide such neat endings. What I found instead was something more valuable. My own strength, my own voice, my own ability to say no and mean it. I learned that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about mutual respect, genuine care, and the choice to support each other in healthy ways. These days, my home is truly my sanctuary again. I've hosted dinner parties for my chosen family, the friends and colleagues who stood by me during the darkest period of my life. I've even started dating again, something I couldn't have imagined when Patricia was terrorizing me. My boyfriend James knows the whole story and has never once suggested I should reconcile with my relatives for the sake of family harmony. Sometimes late at night, I think about Patricia. Not with anger anymore, but with a kind of distant pity. She spent her entire life burning bridges, stealing from people who tried to help her, destroying everything she touched. What a lonely, empty existence that must be. My grandparents enabled her to the point where she never learned to be anything else. In trying to help her, they ensured she would never be capable of helping herself. I think about the moment she pushed her way into my house, how powerless I felt, how certain I was that I had to let her stay because she was family. I think about all the moments after that when I could have given in, dropped the charges, accepted the dysfunction as normal. I'm proud of myself for breaking the cycle, for refusing to be another casualty of Patricia's destruction. It cost me my grandparents and some other relatives, but what I gained, safety, peace, self-respect, was worth so much more. The house is quiet now, but it's a good quiet, a peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear birds singing in the morning and rain pattering against the windows at night. My kitchen, rebuilt from the ashes of Patricia's destruction, is more beautiful than ever. I cook elaborate meals just for myself sometimes, reveling in the fact that all my ingredients will be there when I look for them, that no one will steal my food or leave dirty dishes for me to clean. I keep a photo of my mother on the mantle, right where everyone can see it. It's not the same as having her necklace, but it serves the same purpose, reminding me where I came from and who I want to be. My mother was kind but not weak, generous but not foolish. She knew how to set boundaries, how to protect herself while still caring for others. I like to think she would be proud of how I handled Patricia, proud that I didn't let family dysfunction define or destroy me. To anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation, who might have a Patricia in their life, I want you to know that you're not alone. The pressure to tolerate abuse because it comes from family is real and powerful, but it's also wrong. You have the right to safety in your own home. You have the right to say no. You have the right to press charges when crimes are committed against you, regardless of who commits them. You have the right to choose your own well-being over someone else's dysfunction. It's been 3 years now since that Tuesday afternoon when Patricia knocked on my door. 3 years of peace, growth, and healing. I still have the security cameras, still have the good locks, still have the restraining order in place. But I don't live in fear anymore. I've reclaimed my space, my life, my right to exist without chaos. Patricia took a lot from me. Money, possessions, my mother's necklace, my sense of security, my relationship with my grandparents. But she didn't take the most important things. My resilience, my capacity for joy, my ability to build a better life from the ashes of the one she tried to burn down. Sometimes people ask me if I regret pressing charges, if I wish I had handled things differently to preserve family relationships. The answer is always no. What I regret is not acting sooner, not trusting my instincts when she first pushed her way into my home. I regret the weeks of suffering I endured because I was more afraid of my grandparents' disapproval than my aunt's abuse. But I don't regret choosing my own safety and sanity over toxic family loyalty. The story doesn't have a neat, happy ending where everyone learns their lesson and the family reunites in harmony. Patricia is still Patricia, still cycling through destruction and incarceration. My grandparents are still my grandparents, still believing they were right to enable her. But I'm not waiting for them to change anymore. I'm not putting my life on hold hoping for apologies that will never come or reconciliation that would only invite more chaos. Instead, I'm living. I'm thriving. I'm surrounding myself with people who add value to my life rather than those who seek to destroy it. My home is filled with laughter from friends, not screaming from drunk relatives. My possessions stay where I put them. My food remains in my refrigerator. My peace of mind is intact. These simple things that should be basic rights feel like incredible luxuries after what I went through. The most valuable thing Patricia inadvertently gave me was clarity. Clarity about what I would and wouldn't accept in my life. Clarity about the difference between helping someone and enabling them. Clarity about the fact that sharing DNA with someone doesn't give them the right to abuse me. This clarity has served me well in all areas of my life, helping me set healthy boundaries in relationships, at work, and with myself. I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their destructive behavior. My grandparents thought they were helping Patricia by always bailing her out, always making excuses, always forcing others to tolerate her abuse. But all they did was ensure she never had to face consequences, never had to change, never had to become a functioning adult. Their version of love was actually destruction disguised as compassion. Real love, I've learned, includes boundaries. It includes saying no when necessary. It includes protecting yourself and others from harm. It includes allowing people to face the consequences of their actions so they can learn and grow. Real love would have been getting Patricia help years ago, not enabling her descent into alcoholism and criminality. Real love would have been protecting me, their orphaned granddaughter, from an abusive aunt, not pressuring me to endure her abuse for the sake of family unity. But I can't change them or the past. All I can do is make better choices moving forward. And that's what I've done. Every day I choose peace over chaos. Every day I choose my well-being over others' dysfunction. Every day I choose to surround myself with people who respect me and my boundaries. These choices, made consistently over time, have built a life that Patricia couldn't destroy no matter how hard she tried. So that's my story. The story of how my entitled aunt moved into my house without permission, stole from me, nearly burned the place down, and ended up in prison while I ended up free. Free from her. Free from toxic family dynamics. Free from the belief that I had to tolerate abuse because it came from a relative. It wasn't the story I would have written for myself, but it's the story that taught me who I really am and what I'm capable of surviving. To my mother, wherever she is, I want to say, I lost your necklace, but I kept your values. I lost the gold chain, but I kept the golden lessons you taught me about standing up for myself. I lost the pendant, but I kept the independence you always wanted me to have. And I think, in the end, that's what you really wanted to give me all along. Not just a pretty piece of jewelry, but the strength to build a life worth living, no matter what storms might come my way. And that's exactly what I've done. Looking back now, I realize there were so many warning signs I missed or ignored in those first crucial moments. The way Patricia didn't just knock on my door like a normal person, but pounded on it with her fist, each strike seeming to shake the very foundation of my peaceful existence. The way she had timed her arrival for when she knew I'd be home from work, but not yet settled in for the evening, catching me off guard and vulnerable. Even the way she had positioned her bags on my porch, blocking my ability to easily close the door on her. It was all calculated, all part of her plan. I think about the other people in Patricia's wake of destruction, the trail of broken relationships and burned bridges that followed her everywhere she went. There was her ex-husband, Robert, who I'd met only once at a family reunion before their divorce. He had seemed like such a broken man, jumpy and nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder as if expecting an attack. Now I understood why. Patricia had put him through hell for 7 years before he finally escaped, and even then, she had stalked him for months afterward, showing up at his work, calling his new girlfriend, making his life miserable until he moved to another state entirely. There were the roommates she'd had over the years, a rotating cast of people who had tried to help her and ended up regretting it. Sarah, who had taken Patricia in after her first stint in jail, only to have Patricia seduce her husband and steal her grandmother's antique silverware. Monica, who had offered Patricia a spare room and ended up with a trashed apartment and an eviction notice after Patricia threw a party that resulted in police involvement. Derek, who had tried to help his old friend get back on her feet and ended up in the hospital after Patricia attacked him with a bottle during one of her drunken rages. Each of these people had probably started out like me, thinking they were doing the right thing by helping family or an old friend. Each had probably ignored the warning signs, made excuses for her behavior, given her just one more chance. And each had paid the price for their compassion. I wondered how many of them had also lost family relationships over their refusal to continue enabling Patricia. How many had been told they were selfish, cruel, heartless for finally standing up for themselves. The reconstruction of my kitchen became a metaphor for rebuilding my entire life. Every new cabinet installed was a boundary set. Every fresh coat of paint was a toxic relationship ended. Every new appliance was a choice to prioritize my own well-being. I found myself spending hours in home improvement stores, carefully selecting each item, making sure everything was exactly what I wanted. Not what Patricia would have liked, not what my grandparents would have approved of, but what brought me joy. I chose a bright turquoise for the backsplash, a color that Patricia had once mocked as childish when she saw it in a magazine at my house. I installed open shelving to display my collection of vintage teacups, the ones Patricia had called worthless junk. I bought a professional-grade stove, the kind I'd always dreamed of having, knowing I could finally cook elaborate meals without worrying about someone eating all the ingredients before I could use them. The contractor, a kind man named Miguel, noticed my attention to every detail and asked if I was planning to sell. When I told him no, that I was making it perfect for myself, he smiled and said that was the best reason to renovate. He had no idea how profound that simple statement was for me. For the first time in my life, I was making choices purely for my own happiness, without considering what anyone else might think or want. During the renovation, I also had to deal with the insurance company. They were thorough in their investigation, and I had to relive the nightmare multiple times as different adjusters and investigators asked for my version of events. But each retelling made me stronger, more certain that I had done the right thing. One adjuster, an older woman named Frances, took me aside after our interview and told me about her own sister, who sounded remarkably like Patricia. She said it had taken her 40 years to finally cut contact, and she wished she'd had my courage to do it sooner. The legal proceedings dragged on even after Patricia's conviction. There were appeals, of course, funded by my grandparents' dwindling retirement savings. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that she suffered from mental illness and addiction, that she needed treatment, not incarceration. While I didn't doubt that Patricia had issues, I also knew that she had been offered help many times over the years and had always refused it, preferring to blame everyone else for her problems. The appeals were ultimately unsuccessful, but they extended the stress and forced me to remain vigilant about my safety. During this time, I discovered something disturbing. Patricia had been telling people that I had stolen her inheritance, that my mother had left everything to me and nothing to her own sister. This was completely false. My mother had died with very little besides the house she and my father had bought together, which was still heavily mortgaged. The life insurance had barely covered funeral expenses and my care. But Patricia had created an elaborate fiction where she was the wronged party, cheated out of a fortune by her conniving niece. This lie had spread throughout the extended family and explained some of the hostility I faced from relatives I barely knew. When I tried to correct the record, showing documentation that there had been no significant inheritance, some people accused me of forging documents or hiding assets. It was futile. Patricia had poisoned the well so thoroughly that the truth didn't matter anymore. Those who wanted to believe her would continue to do so regardless of evidence. I learned an important lesson from this. You can't control other people's perceptions or force them to see the truth. All you can do is live your own truth and surround yourself with people who are capable of recognizing reality. The family members who chose to believe Patricia's lies over documented facts were showing me who they really were, and I was better off without them in my life. My workplace became a refuge during this time. Dr. Morrison and my colleagues created a protective bubble around me, making sure I felt safe and supported. They installed new security measures at the office after Patricia had shown up there violating the restraining order. The receptionist, Janet, became particularly protective, screening all my calls and visitors with the determination of a bodyguard. When I tried to thank her, she just said that everyone deserved to feel safe at work, and she was happy to help make that happen for me. The patients, unaware of my personal drama, provided a welcome distraction. Their routine dental problems seemed so manageable compared to what I was dealing with at home. There was something soothing about the predictability of cavities and cleanings, the satisfaction of solving problems that had clear solutions. I threw myself into continuing education, taking courses on the latest dental techniques, partly to improve my skills, but mostly to have something positive to focus on. It was during one of these courses that I met Linda, who would become one of my closest friends. She was another dental hygienist from a neighboring town, and we bonded over coffee during a break. When she asked about my life outside of work, I found myself telling her an abbreviated version of the Patricia saga. Instead of looking uncomfortable or changing the subject like many people did, Linda leaned in with interest and empathy. She shared her own story of a toxic brother who had nearly destroyed her marriage before she finally went no contact. Linda introduced me to the concept of chosen family in a way I hadn't fully understood before. She had built a network of friends who had become closer than her blood relatives, who celebrated holidays together, supported each other through crises, and created the kind of loving, functional relationships that had been absent from their biological families. She invited me to their next gathering, a potluck dinner that felt more like home than any family event I'd attended in years. At that dinner, I met a dozen other people who had similar stories. There was Marcus, who had escaped a cult-like family dynamic. Jennifer, whose mother had stolen her identity and ruined her credit. David, whose brother had tried to sabotage every relationship and job opportunity he'd ever had. And yet, despite these traumatic backgrounds, or perhaps because of them, these people had created something beautiful together. They had proved that family could be chosen, that love didn't require shared DNA, that support could come from unexpected places. The potluck became a monthly tradition that I rarely missed. Sometimes we talked about our trauma, sharing stories and coping strategies. Other times we just enjoyed each other's company, playing board games or watching movies, reveling in the simple pleasure of drama-free interaction. These gatherings helped fill the void left by cutting off my grandparents and other relatives. They showed me what healthy relationships looked like, what it felt like to be accepted without conditions or manipulation. Through this group, I also met James. He wasn't at that first potluck, but joined a few months later, brought by his friend David. James had his own history with family trauma. Parents who had pitted him against his siblings in a toxic competition for affection, creating rifts that could never be healed. He understood immediately why I had made the choices I had, never once suggesting that I should forgive and forget for the sake of family harmony. Our relationship developed slowly, built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. James never pushed for more than I was ready to give, understanding that Patricia's betrayal had left me wary of letting people too close too fast. He earned my trust through consistent actions, showing up when he said he would, respecting my boundaries, and never using emotional manipulation to get his way. It was a revelation to be in a relationship where I didn't have to constantly guard against betrayal. The first time James spent the night at my house, I found myself anxiously watching him, waiting for him to go through my things or help himself to whatever he wanted without asking. When he asked permission before getting a glass of water from the kitchen, I nearly cried. Such a small thing, but it represented everything that had been wrong with Patricia and right with the life I was building. Respect, consideration, boundaries. These weren't too much to ask for, despite what my family had tried to make me believe. As my relationship with James deepened, I had to confront the ways Patricia's invasion had changed me. I had developed habits that I didn't even realize were trauma responses. I counted my cash obsessively. I photographed all my valuables and kept the photos in cloud storage. I had 3 different locks on my bedroom door. I kept important documents in a safety deposit box at the bank. Some might call it paranoia, but my therapist called it a reasonable response to what I'd experienced. Dr. Chen helped me work through these behaviors, keeping the ones that made me feel secure while letting go of the ones that were interfering with my life. We worked on trust exercises, starting small. I practiced leaving my purse in the living room instead of taking it to the bedroom with me. I worked up to keeping some cash in a drawer instead of hiding it all. Each small step felt monumental, but gradually I reclaimed my ability to feel safe in my own home. The therapy also helped me understand the broader family dynamics that had enabled Patricia's behavior for so long. My grandparents, I realized, had their own traumas and dysfunctions that they had never addressed. My grandfather had grown up in poverty with an alcoholic father, and his response was to never hold anyone accountable for drinking because he saw it as a disease rather than a choice. My grandmother had been abandoned by her own mother and overcompensated by refusing to ever give up on family, no matter how toxic they became. Understanding their motivations didn't excuse their behavior, but it helped me let go of the anger I'd been carrying. They were broken people who had created broken dynamics, and I had simply refused to continue the cycle. The generational trauma stopped with me, and that was something to be proud of, even if they couldn't see it that way. About a year into Patricia's incarceration, I received a letter from her. I recognized her handwriting immediately and felt my heart rate spike. My first instinct was to throw it away unread, but curiosity got the better of me. With shaking hands, I opened it, prepared for more manipulation, more blame, more lies. What I found was somehow worse. A complete non-apology disguised as reconciliation. Patricia wrote about how prison had given her time to think, how she realized we had both made mistakes, how she was ready to forgive me for having her arrested if I was ready to forgive her for her small indiscretions. She minimized everything she had done, referring to the theft as borrowing, the fire as an accident, the months of terror as a misunderstanding between family members. She ended by saying she expected to be released early for good behavior and hoped I would pick her up from prison so we could start fresh. The delusion was breathtaking. Even after everything, she still saw herself as the victim, still expected me to accommodate her, still believed that her wants superseded my needs. I showed the letter to Dr. Chen, who helped me compose a response. It was brief and to the point. Patricia was not welcome in my life under any circumstances. The restraining order would remain in effect, and any attempt to contact me again would be reported to the authorities. I sent it through my lawyer to maintain distance and protect myself. The response came not from Patricia, but from my grandparents. They had apparently been visiting her in prison regularly, and she had shared my letter with them. Their letter was full of guilt trips and manipulation, saying that Patricia was a changed woman who deserved a second chance, that I was being unnecessarily cruel, that my mother would be ashamed of how I was treating family. They ended by saying that if I could find it in my heart to forgive Patricia, they would consider letting me back into their lives and their will. The fact that they thought I would want to be let back into their lives showed how little they understood me or the situation. Their money had always been a tool of control, held over the heads of family members to ensure compliance. But I had something worth more than any inheritance: my freedom, my safety, my self-respect. I didn't respond to their letter. There was nothing left to say. As Patricia's release date approached, I had to make some difficult decisions about my safety. The restraining order was still in effect, but I knew that wouldn't stop Patricia if she decided to come after me. I upgraded my security system again, adding more cameras and a panic button that would immediately alert the police. I varied my routine, taking different routes to work and shopping at different times. I made sure my neighbors knew about the situation and had recent photos of Patricia in case she showed up. The preparation felt both necessary and exhausting. Part of me resented having to live this way, having to remain vigilant against someone who should never have been a threat in the first place. But the larger part of me was proud of taking my safety seriously, of not minimizing the danger out of misplaced hope that Patricia had changed. Prison might have given her time to think, but it hadn't given her empathy or accountability. Those were things she would have to develop on her own, if ever. Patricia was released on a Thursday morning in February. I knew because my lawyer had arranged to be notified, wanting to ensure I was prepared. I took the day off work and spent it with James and Linda, surrounded by people who cared about my well-being. We didn't talk about Patricia much, instead focusing on a puzzle we were working on together. But their presence was a comfort. I wasn't alone anymore. I had people who would stand by me, who understood why this day was difficult, who didn't judge me for being anxious about the release of someone who had terrorized me. That evening, as predicted, Patricia showed up at my house. I watched on the security cameras as she approached the front door, looking thinner than before but with that same entitled expression. She knocked, then rang the doorbell, then knocked again harder. When I didn't answer, she began yelling, demanding that I let her in, saying she had nowhere else to go, that I owed her after getting her locked up. The same old manipulation, the same old blame, the same old Patricia. I called the police while she was still on my porch. They arrived within minutes. I had made sure they were aware of the situation and the restraining order. Patricia tried her tears and manipulation with them, but they had her record. They had the restraining order, and they had me on the phone calmly explaining that she was violating the court order. She was arrested again, this time for violation of the restraining order, and I added another charge to the growing list of Patricia's crimes against me. My grandparents called within hours, having somehow heard about the arrest already. Harold's voice was weaker than I remembered, but his anger was just as strong. He accused me of setting Patricia up, of baiting her into violating the order. When I pointed out that she had made the choice to come to my house knowing about the restraining order, he said I should have made an exception, that she was family and had just gotten out of prison with nowhere to go. The circular logic was exhausting. In their minds, Patricia was never responsible for her choices, and everyone else was always obligated to accommodate her. I hung up on him mid-sentence. It was liberating to realize I didn't have to listen to the guilt trips anymore. I didn't have to justify my boundaries or explain why I deserved safety in my own home. The people who mattered understood. The people who didn't understand didn't matter. It was a simple philosophy that had taken me 30-something years to learn, but better late than never. Patricia's new arrest led to more jail time and extended probation. She was ordered to stay out of my city entirely, not just away from me. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who had seen too many repeat offenders, told Patricia plainly that any further violations would result in significant prison time. For once, Patricia seemed to understand that her actions had consequences. She didn't cry or plead. She just nodded and was led away. It was the last time I saw her in person. The months that followed were blissfully quiet. No unexpected knocks on the door, no missing items, no smoke-filled kitchens. I redecorated the house again, this time for joy rather than recovery. I painted murals on the walls, planted a garden in the backyard, adopted a rescue cat named Mochi, who had also escaped from a bad situation. Life took on a rhythm that had nothing to do with crisis management and everything to do with simple, everyday happiness. James and I grew closer, eventually moving in together. The decision to share my space again after what had happened with Patricia was not made lightly. But James had proved himself trustworthy in 1,000 small ways. He respected my need for certain boundaries, understood why I still kept important documents locked up, never questioned the security measures that might have seemed excessive to someone else. He brought his own furniture and belongings, and we blended our lives together carefully, intentionally, with mutual respect at every step. Our housewarming party was filled with chosen family. Linda and the potluck group, my colleagues from work, the neighbors who had supported me through the Patricia ordeal. As I looked around at the faces of people who had shown me what real love and support looked like, I felt a fullness that had nothing to do with blood relations and everything to do with genuine connection. This was what family was supposed to be. Years passed. Patricia faded from an active threat to a cautionary tale I occasionally shared with others in similar situations. I heard updates occasionally through the family grapevine. Another arrest here, another failed relationship there, another bridge burned. My grandparents continued to enable her until they became too frail to do so, ending up in a nursing home with their savings depleted and their house sold. They never reached out to apologize or reconcile, and I made peace with that. Some relationships aren't meant to be repaired. I did, however, reconnect with some other family members who had distanced themselves from the Patricia drama. My cousin Elena, who had lived overseas during the worst of it, reached out after hearing the full story from a mutual friend. She shared her own experiences with Patricia from their childhood, validating my experiences and apologizing for not warning me. We built a cautious friendship, bonding over our shared understanding of what Patricia was capable of and our mutual decision to keep her out of our lives. Through Elena, I also learned more about my mother's relationship with Patricia. Apparently, my mother had also tried to help Patricia numerous times over the years, paying for rehab programs Patricia never completed, covering rent when Patricia was between jobs, trying to provide the stability their parents never had. But Patricia had betrayed her trust repeatedly, culminating in Patricia trying to seduce my father while my mother was undergoing cancer treatment. The fact that my mother had still given her chances after that showed just how deep the family dysfunction ran. This knowledge made me even more grateful for the boundaries I had set. I wasn't repeating my mother's mistakes, wasn't sacrificing my well-being on the altar of family obligation. I was breaking the cycle, creating a new pattern based on mutual respect and healthy relationships. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when I felt guilty, when the old programming tried to kick in. But those moments became fewer and farther between as time went on. My career flourished without the constant stress of Patricia's chaos. I became a lead hygienist at the practice, mentoring newer staff members and helping to implement new patient care protocols. Dr. Morrison eventually offered me a partnership in the practice, recognizing my dedication and skill. The financial security this provided was deeply meaningful to someone who had watched Patricia drain my resources. I could save again, plan for the future, make choices based on what I wanted rather than crisis management. James and I got married in a small ceremony in our backyard, surrounded by our chosen family. It was everything my life with Patricia hadn't been: peaceful, joyful, and drama-free. As I stood there exchanging vows, I thought about how different my life could have been if I had continued to allow toxic people access to it. Every good thing in my life had come after I set boundaries, after I chose my own well-being over family expectations. We decided not to have children, a decision influenced partly by not wanting to risk exposing them to the toxic family dynamics that still existed. But we became the designated aunt and uncle to our friends' children, providing a stable, loving presence in their lives. We hosted holiday dinners for others who were estranged from their families, creating new traditions based on respect and genuine affection rather than obligation and guilt. One day, while cleaning out a closet, I found a box of photos from before Patricia's invasion. There were pictures of family gatherings where she loomed in the background, already showing signs of the person she would become. In every photo, someone looked uncomfortable, wary, on edge. We had all been walking on eggshells around her for years, decades even, trying to prevent the explosion that was always inevitable. I kept one photo, one of my mother and me at my high school graduation. Patricia wasn't in it, having been in jail at the time for one of her various offenses. My mother looked relieved, truly happy, without the tension that usually marked family events. It reminded me that my mother had also tried to set boundaries with Patricia, had also recognized the toxicity, even if she hadn't been able to fully escape it. I was living the life my mother had wanted for both of us. The other photos I threw away. There was no point in keeping reminders of dysfunction and pain. My walls were now covered with pictures of my chosen family, of adventures with James, of celebrations that weren't marred by anxiety about what Patricia might do. These were the memories worth preserving, the relationships worth maintaining. The past could stay in the past where it belonged. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had never let Patricia into my house that day. Would she have eventually given up and found another victim? Would my grandparents have been forced to take her in and finally seen her true nature? Would I have maintained those toxic family relationships out of habit rather than choice? There's no way to know, and ultimately it doesn't matter. What matters is that Patricia's invasion, as traumatic as it was, taught me invaluable lessons about boundaries, self-respect, and the true meaning of family. I learned that no is a complete sentence, that family doesn't have the right to abuse you, that enabling isn't love, that safety trumps guilt, that chosen family can be stronger than blood, that it's never too late to change the patterns of a lifetime, that peace is worth more than any inheritance, that some bridges need to be burned to protect your own well-being. These lessons came at a high price, but they transformed my life in ways I never could have imagined. Today, my home is still my sanctuary, but it's no longer a fortress. The security measures remain because they make me feel safe, but they're no longer the focus of my life. I can leave my purse on the counter without anxiety. I can have people over without counting the silver afterward. I can exist in my own space without constantly looking over my shoulder. The hypervigilance has faded, replaced by a calm awareness that I can handle whatever comes my way. Patricia still exists somewhere out there in the world, presumably still creating chaos wherever she goes. But she's no longer my problem, no longer my responsibility, no longer a threat to my peace. She's just a chapter in my story, an important one that taught me crucial lessons, but not the defining one. I define myself through my choices, my boundaries, my refusal to accept the unacceptable. And that definition has nothing to do with her.